There's a town in Australia so dangerous the government erased it from every official map, closed the roads, and made it illegal to visit. Around 2,000 people have died from simply living there. But the most disturbing part isn't the death toll, it's that for decades children played in the very dust that was killing their parents, and the people in charge knew. Wittenoom isn't even the strangest town on this list. There are places where entire populations vanished in 3 weeks. A town where the only trace of 1,000 miners is flowers they planted a century ago, and a settlement in the middle of the Nullarbor desert that had a hospital, a swimming pool, and a golf course. Today, it has 4 residents. These are 15 Australian ghost towns that someone, somewhere, decided you weren't meant to find. Western Australia alone has catalogued over 550 abandoned communities, and that list keeps growing. Most of them aren't on any map you've ever seen. The towns that switched off overnight. On December 28, 1963, the residents of Gwalia, Western Australia, received a single piece of news. The mine was closing. Within 3 weeks, almost everyone was gone. 1,200 people vanished from a town that had operated for over 60 years. But here's what makes Gwalia different from a normal ghost town. People didn't pack up. They walked out midlife. Cottages still have furniture inside, crockery sitting on shelves, as if the residents stepped out for an errand and never came back. It's frozen, not by ice, but by the speed of the exit. And there's a detail that makes it stranger. A future president of the United States once managed the Sons of Gwalia gold mine and lived in a house perched above the pit. Herbert Hoover, decades before the White House, ran operations here. That house is now a luxury bed and breakfast, where tourists sip coffee, overlooking the modern open-pit mine that swallowed the town below it. You can sleep where a president slept and wake, up staring into a crater that ate a community. Gwalia wasn't unique. When BHP suspended its Nickel West operations in 2024, the town of Kambalda lost 3,000 jobs in a single announcement. Housing prices collapsed from $400,000 to around $150,000, a 62% wipeout. Families who bought homes during the boom woke up trapped, unable to sell without losing everything, and unable to stay because there was nothing left to stay for. Australian towns don't decline slowly. They switch off. Gwalia at least left something behind. The next few towns left almost nothing, except one detail so eerie, it'll stay with you. The towns that nature swallowed whole 3,000 tin miners once lived in Poimena, Tasmania. Nearly 1,000 of them were Chinese workers who'd crossed an ocean chasing opportunity. The town had 3 hotels, shops, a school, a real community carved into the Tasmanian highlands. Today there's nothing. No buildings, no foundations visible, just an open field where a town used to stand. If you walked through Poimena without knowing its history, you'd see empty grassland and keep moving. But lining the former streets are foxgloves, flowering plants seeded more than a century ago by those Chinese miners. They planted them outside their homes, the way people do when they're building a life they expect to keep. The miners are long gone, but the flowers survived. Living plants tracing the grid of an invisible town, blooming along streets that no longer exist. It's the quietest kind of haunting, not ghosts, just flowers remembering where houses used to be. Further south, Pillinger tells a similar story with a different texture. 3 wharves, a railway terminus, sawmills, all built by mining magnate James Crotty's company in the late 1800s. After his death and a corporate collapse, the Tasmanian rainforest simply ate the town. Today you could walk through the site and never know a port city once stood there. The trees moved in like they'd been waiting, and within a generation, Pillinger was gone. These towns at least had the dignity of fading quietly. The next one was killed deliberately, and the people running it knew what was happening for years. The town they murdered. Poimina and Pillinger disappeared because nature reclaimed them. Wittenoom was erased on purpose because the truth about it was too dangerous to leave standing. In the 1930s, Wittenoom was the largest town in Western Australia's Pilbara region. Blue asbestos mining had built a full community, families, schools, a hospital, real infrastructure. People moved here believing they were building futures. The dust was everywhere. It coated the roads because the mine operators had paved them with asbestos tailings. It hung in the air around the processing plants. Children played in it after school, kicking up clouds of fine blue fibre like it was red outback dirt. Workers came home coated in it, tracking it into kitchens and bedrooms, and the people in charge knew. A former resident recalled they were never told about the dangers, but internal documents show the risks were understood. The mine operators and government knew that blue asbestos was lethal, and the town kept running anyway. Approximately 2,000 people have died from asbestos-related illness connected to Wittenoom. Researchers have compared the toll to Chernobyl. The mine finally closed in 1966, but the dying didn't stop. Mesothelioma can take 30 to 40 years to surface, which means people who left Wittenoom as children spent decades feeling perfectly healthy, raising families, building careers, living normal lives, before the dust they'd breathed as kids caught up to them. Some didn't get sick until the 1990s. Some are still getting sick now. The government's response was erasure. In 2007, Wittenoom's town status was officially revoked. Its name was removed from maps. Roads leading in were closed and barricaded. Signage was pulled down. The town was, in effect, deleted, wiped from the record as though removing the name could undo what happened there. But families still want access to the cemetery where their relatives are buried, and authorities haven't clearly explained how or if those visits will be allowed. The town that was meant to disappear still has people fighting to remember it. If you're finding this valuable, subscribing helps us keep making these deep dives, and you won't want to miss what's coming, because the towns ahead get stranger. The Desert Mirage. With a swimming pool, Wittenoom was erased because it was dangerous. Cook wasn't dangerous at all. It simply lost the only reason it existed. Built in 1917 in the middle of the Nullarbor plain, roughly 100 kilometres from the nearest highway, Cook sat on the world's longest straight stretch of railway, 478 kilometres without a single curve. At its peak, the town had several hundred residents, a hospital, a school, a swimming pool, and a golf course. In the desert. Picture that for a second. A functioning community with a 9-hole course, surrounded by nothing but flat red earth stretching to the horizon in every direction. When the Trans-Australian Railway was privatised in 1997, the reason for Cook's existence evaporated overnight. Today, 4 people live there. Their job is maintaining the track, so the Indian Pacific passenger train can pass through twice a week. The hospital is empty. The school is empty. The pool is a cracked concrete shell filling with dust. Tourists get 20 minutes to wander the empty streets, snap photos of a sign that reads Cook, population 4, and climb back aboard before the desert swallows the silence again. Then the platform goes quiet, and 4 people are alone again in a town built for hundreds, surrounded by one of the most featureless landscapes on the planet. Cook is a ghost town that still technically functions, but only barely, and only for the convenience of people passing through. Cook was abandoned because it lost its purpose. But some of these towns were abandoned because staying became physically impossible, and not because of what was in the ground. When disasters stack up, Cook died from irrelevance. These next towns were killed by compounding disasters, industrial, natural, criminal, until the will to stay simply broke. Gormanston, Tasmania, was a copper mining community that suffered a catastrophic mine fire in 1912, killing 42 workers underground. 42 men who went to work that morning and never came home. The town tried to recover, rebuilding around the grief the way mining towns always do, because the ore was still there and the families still needed to eat. But in 1951, cyclone-force winds tore through and destroyed key buildings. Two disasters, decades apart, and neither one survivable alone. Together, they sealed Gormanston's fate. Mathina, Tasmania died officially from economic decline, but an unsolved 1913 murder haunts the town's memory. A farmer named William James Mullins was found dead on a makeshift funeral pyre, a detail so disturbing and so unexplained that it became local legend. Nobody was ever charged. The case was never solved. Then there's Altunga in the Northern Territory, Australia's first official gold rush town in Central Australia, now a crumbling ruin in one of the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth. Corydala in Queensland, a copper town that boomed in the early 1900s and emptied when the price dropped. Hill End in New South Wales, which once rivaled Sydney in population during the gold rush, and now has fewer than 200 residents. Cossack in Western Australia, a former pearling port where cyclones kept flattening what the industry decline had already weakened. Old Halls Creek, abandoned when the entire town was relocated 14 kilometres away because the original site flooded too often. Every one of these places was built on a single bet. One mine, one railway, one resource. When the bet failed, there was no backup plan. And what almost nobody realises is just how widespread this pattern actually is. The graveyard nobody counted. Each of those towns felt like a one-off disaster. But step back and the numbers reveal something much bigger. In Western Australia alone, a specialist cataloguing project has documented over 550 ghost or abandoned communities, more than double the 250 they initially expected to find. And that's just one state. There is no agreed upon national catalogue of Australian ghost towns. Nobody actually knows the full number. The research keeps expanding because the abandonment keeps turning up in places nobody had thought to look. The National Archives has run exhibitions using photographs, blueprints, and film footage from these sites, showing both the luxuries these towns once had, swimming pools and grand hotels, and the horrors they endured, typhoid outbreaks and rabbit plagues that stripped the land bare. But social historians point out that Indigenous presence, displacement, and continuing connections to the land around these sites remain barely documented at all. The ghost towns that made it onto heritage lists are the lucky ones. Most just dissolved without anyone writing it down. The heritage paradox. You'd think that number, 550 and climbing, would trigger a national push to preserve these places, but the reality is more complicated and more revealing. Some ghost towns have been resurrected as tourist attractions. Gwalia's Hoover House is a functioning bed and breakfast. Cossack has cafes and a museum. Walhalla in Victoria runs a heritage trail where visitors walk through restored mining-era buildings. You can book a night in a former mine manager's cottage and photograph the ruins for social media. But at the same time, Wittenoom Cemetery is fenced off, its roads barricaded, its name scrubbed from every official map. The same country that markets some ghost towns as charming heritage sites is actively trying to make others disappear completely. That tension between preserving memory and enforcing erasure is the real story underneath all 15 of these towns. Which ones get remembered isn't about history, it's about liability. The cycle that never stops. The heritage paradox exists because this isn't a historical problem, it's a recurring one. The pattern is structural And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Mining boom, commodity crash. Population exodus, infrastructure decay, erasure. It happened with gold in the 1890s, tin in the early 1900s, copper at mid-century, asbestos in the 1960s, and it's happening right now with nickel in the 2020s. BHP's suspension sent shockwaves through communities that are facing the exact same trajectory Gwalia faced 60 years ago. The towns change, the minerals change, but the cycle doesn't. Australia is still making ghost towns, right now, in real time. What the flowers remember, the pattern keeps repeating. But sometimes, something survives the cycle. In Poi Mena, 1,000 miners, most of them Chinese immigrants who crossed oceans for the promise of opportunity, planted flowers outside their homes, in a Tasmanian highland they would never see again. The miners are gone. The homes are gone. The town is gone from every map. But the foxgloves keep blooming year after year, tracing the outline of streets that no longer exist. Purple flowers standing in neat rows along paths where families once walked to the general store, where children ran to school, where people lived ordinary lives they believed would last. That's what a ghost town really is. Not empty buildings, but the echo of people who believed they were building something permanent, and sometimes the only proof they were ever there is something alive that refuses to stop growing.